Do you have a 48 needle circular knitting machine and want to incorporate the cable look in your knit projects? I will show how I make this infinity cowl scarf and also make the knit cables. So what you will need to do the cable knit stitch is, of course, your 48 needle circular knitting machine, and we're going to have it on tube mode. You'll need your project yarn, and then you'll need your scrap yarn or waste yarn in a similar way as your project yarn, but in a contrasting color. You'll want scissors, some stitch markers, a darning needle or what's called a large eye plastic needle. A loom pick comes in handy, but you can also use a paper clip if you don't have one of these. Circular knitting needles, as well as a nooking hook, which this is a crochet hook with a large eye opening at the end. The circular knitting needles I have, I don't know what size they are. They came with my 40 needle circular knitting machine, but you want the needle to be able to go in between these two pegs. So to start our project, we're going to do the waste yarn cast on method with our waste or scrap yarn. I like to start at my 48th needle and do between 5-6 rows. And then we're going to add on our project yarn, and I cranked out 110 rows for a cowl scarf. So I'm speeding this part up because this video is pretty long on how to do the cable itself, so I didn't want to take up too much time doing just making our tube. If you want a more step-by-step tutorial on how to do this part of the project, I have it linked in the video description below on how to do the waste yarn cast on. So once you have cranked out as many rows as you want, I did 110, but you can definitely do more if you want a longer scarf. We're going to cast off. Now we take the rest of our project yarn, I put it in the middle of my machine, and I stopped at my 47th needle because I like to start my cast on at my 48th white needle. It's a good visual for me. So now when I crank forward with my knitting needles, the white needle drops down. So this is my 48th needle, and I'm going to pick it up with my circular knitting needles. And then we're going to cast off just like how you would do a normal cast off with thread. And with yarn and with your needle, but we're using the knitting needles because we're going to be moving these stitches around a little bit, and it's easier to do this with circular knitting needles than it is with just yarn and a regular darning needle. And so here's where you just want to take a little bit of time removing your stitches. I like to do it on the right side of my machine, right as that needle comes down, because then the other stitches that are to my left, they're still on those hooks, they're up, and so I'm not worried as much as those stitches coming off of the needles and dropping the stitches and I'm having to fix them. So this is the way I like to cast off, but however you like to cast off is fine. So now I'm just going to speed this video up. I'm going to cast off all the way around till the project's completely off of my machine. And sometimes as you're going with your knitting needles, these are circular knitting needles that are connected with the cord, you might have to scrunch it up a little bit on the cord so you can get all the stitches off your machine. Okay, now we're almost done removing all of our stitches. I have one more I want to do, and so I'm going to take him off. And that was my last needle, my 47th needle. And before I move on, I want to get 2 stitch markers, and I want them 2 different colors because I want to mark what my beginning stitch is, which is my 48th needle. That's where I like to start my rows. You can always start it at your number 1 needle. I just like the visual of the white needle for me. And then I'm going to use the orange stitch marker so I know that that's my 47th needle. So I know where my rows start and stop in the round. So now the fun part, we're going to make our cable. So we have our circular knitting needles on our project, and we're going to move some of these stitches over to the other needle because I don't want to drop my stitches to make my cable right where my rows start and stop, because that's where my project yarn is still hooked together. So I want to move a few of the stitches over so my cable is more towards the middle of my project. So it just takes a minute to kind of scrunch up everything to get to the end of your needles to move it on to the other needle, and you're going to do it stitch by stitch. And I moved over 12 stitches from my right needle over to my left needle. Now I am not a hand knitter. I crochet, but I don't knit, so this just takes me a moment. If you're not a knitter, it might just take you a second too. I'd go stitch by stitch until I kind of get the hang of it, and then I'll kind of pick up a couple at a time, but you just want to make sure you don't drop any stitches because then you're going to have to fix them if they unravel. But I went 12 stitches over from my starting stitch. And so now I'm just going to speed this up. I'm just moving 12 stitches over from my right needle to my left needle. Now we're going to remove 6 stitches off of our needle, and you can decide where you want to remove these 6 stitches from your right or your left needle. I ended up doing 6 stitches off of my left needle because I wanted it a little bit closer to the edge of my project. I ended up doing 2 cables for this, but if you just want one, you can do it in the middle. So you take 6 stitches off of your needle, and now the fun part of dropping your stitches. So you're just going to pull the end of the yarn, and you're going to pull up, make sure you have 6 loops, those are your 6 stitches, and now we're going to start dropping the stitches all the way down until you only have about 6 rows left of your project yarn. So I'm going to speed this up, and we're just dropping all the stitches down, and you just want to make sure you can always have 6 loops after you drop each stitch. If you start only getting 5, you're not dropping all of your stitches. So go back up and find where that 6th loop is and pull the yarn, and you'll get all 6. So as I start getting closer here to the bottom, before I get to my 6th row, I'm going to count up with some waste yarn. So I unravel where my waste yarn is. I have my darning needle with some more waste yarn, and I count 6 rows up. And now I'm going to pick up some loops, and this is a kind of like a ravel cord technique to save your stitches so they don't continue to drop past where I want them to. And I will zoom in here so you can see a little bit better what I'm doing. And I started over to more my 7th or 8th stitch over, and I'm picking up just 1 stitch of each V stitch of the knit stitch. So I'm picking up the right stitch of the V, and I have 6 stitches that are dropped, but I started kind of over 2 rows, and I went over 2 rows. And now you can see as I continue to drop the 6 stitches, once I get down to where this ravel cord is, or my cord saver is, they will stop dropping the stitch. And so I'm really close. I think I have 1 or 2 more I need to drop, and then the loops will be hooked on just to that ravel cord. So now that we've dropped the stitches to our last one, he's hooked on to our ravel cord. And now we're going to do what's called canooking. And this is doing knit stitches with a crochet hook. And we're going to count 6 of our pieces of yarn, and then I put a stitch marker just to kind of take the other ones out of the way because we don't need those for right now. And now we take our nooking hook, which is a crochet hook with this big eye at the end, and we're going to pick up the 6 stitches that are on our waste yarn or on our ravel cord, the live stitches here. So for our first row, these stitches here, we're going to do our twist and our cord. So these last 3 that are to the left, so our 4th, 5th, and 6th stitch, it's going to twist. So we're going to pick up the 4th stitch first. When we do the twist for the cord, the stitches can get kind of tight. So on our 3rd stitch, I like to put a stitch marker because this will be the tightest stitch once we get the twist. And the stitch marker helps pull up the stitch so it's easier to do. Now take your nooking crochet hook and your first piece of yarn. You want to go in the order the yarns were dropped, and we're going to pick up the 4th stitch, and then we're going to yarn over and pull it through the stitch. Now we leave the 1 loop on our hook, go to the 5th live stitch, go through it, yarn over, just pull through the 5th stitch, leave the loop on your hook. Go to your 6th stitch, go through that, yarn over, pull through, and leave this loop on your hook. Now we're going to do the twist for the cable. So we want to pull those 3 live stitches we have not picked up yet, and we're going to pick up the number 1 stitch, leaving the 3 loops on our hook. And it gets kind of tight here, but we need to pull it over like this. And then we're going to pick up that first stitch with our hook. So you might have to pull it kind of tight, and we're going to pick up the first live stitch with our crochet hook. And now that it's on our crochet hook, now we're going to take that same piece of yarn, and we're going to yarn over, and we're going to pull the yarn through just the number 1 stitch that we just picked up. Now we have 4 loops left on our hook. Now we're going to take our second stitch, pick him up, then we're going to yarn over with the piece of yarn, pull it through just the first stitch on our hook, that was our number 2 stitch, leave that loop on our hook, and now we have our last loop, which was the number 3 stitch, and it's kind of hidden. That's why it's nice to have the stitch marker, because you can pull it to get the loop. Now we're going to have that on our loop. We're going to yarn over and pull through our number 3 stitch. And now we should have 6 stitches left on our crochet hook. Now we don't need our stitch marker anymore. We can remove him for now for this row. And now, since all of our 6 live stitches are on our crochet hook, they are secure. And we can now remove our ravel cord saver. Now we need to secure the stitches that are on our nooking hook. So we take that same piece of waste yarn, or what could be the cord saver, put it through the eye at the end of our crochet hook. And so that's why these are a special nooking hook, because they have this eye. And then we're going to pull that waste yarn through our 6 stitches, and that's going to secure them so they don't drop. Now we're going to work on our second row. Take your next piece of yarn in order of when it was dropped, and we're going to use it to pick up our 6 stitches in order, starting at the number 1 all the way to the number 6 stitch. So take your hook, pick up your first stitch, put it on the crochet hook, yarn over, and pull the yarn through the loop and leave this loop on the hook. Go to your second stitch, pick it up, yarn over, pull through, and leave this loop on your hook. Do the third stitch, yarn over, pull through, and leave the third loop on your crochet hook. Pick up your fourth stitch, yarn over, and pull through, leaving this loop on your crochet hook, or on your nooking hook, I guess is what it is. Pick up your fifth stitch, yarn over, leave your fifth stitch on the loop, and then pick up your sixth and last stitch, yarn over, and pull through. And now you have your 6 stitches on your crochet hook. At this point, you may need to pull up on the stitches one by one to even them out and to get all the slack of the yarn done. So now we've pulled them up, that's done. Remove your piece of waste yarn, put it on the end of your nooking hook. And we're just going to thread it through the eye and pull it through to secure your 6 stitches. Now we're going to do our third row. Rows 2 through 6 are all just going to be straight rows. And you can decide where you want to do your twist, just be consistent. I'm doing it every 6 rows. So on my first row, after I get done with my 6th row, on my first row, then I'm going to do a twist, and then I do rows 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all straight. And then starting with row 1, I do another twist. So it just depends on how many twists you want to do. You can do more twists by doing less rows that are in order, or you can do less twists by doing more rows in order. And again, once you have those live stitches on your crochet hook, you might just need to kind of tug at them a little bit to pull them out because they're a little bit tight. And then you'll remove your waste yarn, put it at the end of your nooking hook, and then pull it through to secure the stitches, and then go to your next row. So now we're just going to do another row. This one's in order. He's going to be a straight row. And the main thing is these pieces of yarn you pick up, you want to make sure you're picking them up in order too. You don't want to twist them. So keep an eye on that. And now we're going to pick up our 6 stitches. 4, 5, and 6. Those are now secure. Give them a little pull to kind of even them out and take up any slack from the yarn, piece of yarn that we just picked up. Remove our waste yarn and then add it to the end of our nooking hook and pull the waste yarn through our live stitches to secure them. And now we're going to do our 5th row, and again this is a row that we pick them up in order. And so I'm going to speed this up just a little bit because our 5th row and our 6th row are all the same. Remember, rows 2 through 6 or 2 through however many you want to do before your twist, you pick up each stitch in order. So now I'm just finishing up my row 6th here, and now we're going to start with our number 1 row after I put my waste yarn back in there to secure it. Starting with number 1, we want to take our stitch marker and we want to mark the number 3rd stitch from the right because that's going to be our tightest stitch that we do when we go to do the twist. Pick up your number 4th stitch, and we're going to now secure the first 4, 5, and 6 stitch. So we have 3 loops on our hook. Now we're going to do our twist. We put the 3 stitches to the back that are on the crochet hook, and the 3 stitches still on the waste yarn go to the front. And now we pick up the number 1 stitch. So we pick up number 1, pick up number 2, and you can see why it's so useful to have a piece of yarn for your waste yarn or your ravel cord that's a different color, so it's really easy to see your stitches. We picked up the 2nd stitch. Now the 3rd one, just kind of pull on that stitch marker so you can get inside that loop there. We don't need him anymore, so we can remove it. And now we want to secure our last stitch. And it might be kind of tight, so you might just need to kind of pull a little bit and take your time and then kind of move up your stitches. And I always count to make sure I got all 6 and then kind of pull on those stitches. We'll remove the waste yarn, put it at the end of our needle, secure the 6 stitches on our crochet hook with the waste yarn. And now rows 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, we're going to pick up the stitches in order. Once we get done with our 6th row, the next first row of 6, you're going to do your next twist for your cord. And that's the pattern that we're going to do for the cord twist. You're going to do this all the way up to the top of your project. And so here's how it looks after doing a few twists. And then here's how it looks where I did 2 twists on the same project. So I did the same thing where I dropped the stitches and did the twist all the way up. Once you're done making your cords, once you get back up to the top, then you want to secure the live stitches that are left on your waste yarn and put them back on to your knitting needles. Once all those 6 stitches are back onto your needles, you can remove that waste yarn. And those stitches are secure. And then after we remove our waste yarn, now we want to get our rows back to where we have our 48th stitch onto our left needle and our 47th stitch onto our right needle, because that's the start and stop of our rows. So you'll have to transfer some stitches around till you get back to your starting and stopping point. And so that's why we still have the stitch markers up there, so I know which ones all go on the right and which ones go on the left. Now we're going to close the tube up, making like an infinity scarf or an infinity cowl in this case. But because of this cord that we did, this circumference is now a lot smaller than the machine. So I tried, but I could not get it back onto the machine like I've done with some of my other projects, because doing that twist has made the circumference smaller. I can only get about 10 or 12 needles to have stitches on it, and then it became too tight and I couldn't rotate the machine. But that's okay, we can still slip stitch everything together. We're going to take the 2 ends and we're going to slip stitch it in the round, so we have an infinity scarf. Now this is much easier to do when you start and end your project with the waste yarn, because it's easier to pick up our stitches. But we can still do it this way, and it's nice to have the cord instead of just yarn because it's easier to see your stitches as well. So you can see where I have the tail ends of my waist yarn side. Down here, I have them together at one end, and then they're lining up with my 2 stitch markers because that's also the start and stop of my rows on the other side of my tube. So we want them on the same side so we don't get a twist in our project. Now, starting at where the tail end of our project yarn is and at where our stitch marker was for our 48th needle, we're going to start slip stitching these stitches together. So I pick up my 48th stitch that has my teal stitch marker and then the stitch on my other side of my tube that has the waist yarn. So I have 2 loops on my hook and I slip stitch the one through the other. And now we're going to pick up the stitch on the right side that's on the circular knitting needles. And this is more difficult since we don't have waist yarn to help us hold the stitch. So this is where a loom pick can come in handy to kind of pick up that stitch so we can get our crochet hook under. And after I did a few of these, I got a little more of the hang of it. And then we're going to slip stitch the first loop through the second loop. And so we pick that up. Now we go over to the left, pick up our stitch, and slip stitch together. Now we go to the right, pick up our next loop, and you might need your loom pick. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to make kind of this X shape or zigzag shape, picking up each stitch, go into each side, the left, slip stitch through, then pick up the right stitch and slip stitch through, and then back to the left, all the way around to make an infinity scarf or an infinity cowl. If you don't do a cord for your scarf or your cowl and you just do your waist yarn cast on, crank out as many rows as you want, and then do a cast off with waist yarn, this process of slip stitching an infinity scarf is way easier because you have waist yarn at the start and at the end, so you're able to see your stitches. But this does work. It just takes a little bit of time to work around the cord, but it's a lot easier than if there was just yarn in there, because I feel like at least the cord gave me some room to see where my stitches were. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit, but we go all the way around till we get back to our tail end of our project yarn. The other thing you want to check is you want to make sure you're picking up each stitch on both sides of the tube. When you're making your zigzag pattern, if you notice a bigger hole somewhere in where you're stitching it together, that means you've missed a stitch. And if you were to take out the waist yarn or the knitting needles, the cord of the knitting needles, that stitch would then drop and that row would completely unravel and drop. So you just want to take your time when doing this, making sure you're picking up all 48 stitches on both sides of the tube and slip stitching them together to secure it. And then since we're doing this as an infinity scarf, slip stitching the circumference of both tubes together, you're going to have to like twist your scarf and fold it around to get to all the stitches. And again, this takes some time to do. So just be patient and make sure you get all the stitches. If you find you see a hole and that you missed a stitch, just undo the slip stitches, go back up to where you missed it and pick up the stitch you missed and then continue on down your project. Like I had to do there, I missed a stitch, so I had to open them up again. I just like dropped my crochet hook from the loop, pulled it a little bit, and the stitches will unlatch from each other. Once we're down to the end, we can get to the tail end of our yarn. Take the tail end, slip stitch it through the last loop, and pull all the way through to secure it. Now we can remove our stitch markers, and we can also remove the circular knitting needles, and might have to kind of scrunch up your project to get it off of the knitting needles. That will just take a little bit of time because since the knitting needles are straight, so just kind of pull them in and through. And I start taking one stitch off of the needle at a time, working its way down and around. And once I got kind of a few off, then it came off really easy. So it just takes a little bit to get the stitches off of the needles. There we go. Now that the knitting needles are out of our project, now we can remove our waist yarn. Now this was the cast on, and again, we did it in a tube. So I didn't do a ravel cord on this because then our waist yarn would still be hooked around the circumference of the project. So just find the cast on tail end, the most outer piece of yarn or row, find the tail and make it go through the stitches all the way around on the first row, and then once they're out of those stitches on the first row, then it will unravel like normal. So I'll speed this part up as I'm taking out the waste yarn, and this is where you hope you've done all your stitches, that you locked them down completely, because if not, they will drop. So here it is. Here's how it looks at the end. Once we get that all done and secured, the tail ends of our yarn that we still have left, I just knot them down. I tie them together to secure them. And then I put the tail ends on my needle and I kind of weave in the ends a couple of times through my knot that I did. And then I put them in between the two layers of my cowl, and then I cut off any excess. And then so here's how it looks. And I did 2 cords on this project, but I ended up, you don't really see it on the edge. That was my first idea. I thought they'd be on the edge and look really nice. It looks nice right here, but once it's on, you really can't see them as much. So in like my picture here, I have them in the middle. So I have one on each side. So because how we secured down the tubes together, it does make it a full infinity scarf. So you can move where these cords are. You can have 2 showing if you did 2, or I moved 1 then on each side for my pictures. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial on how to make a cord using your Sentro knitting machine tubes. I appreciate all the likes and the follows and the comments. Happy crafting, everybody.